Thank you so much for joining us for this recap of God's heart for the broken. Chances are, if you spend any time in parking lots, you have seen cars, usually they're pretty fancy cars, parked diagonally in a parking space. And the reason they do that is because they don't want cars to park too close to them, open up the door, and then ding their paint job. I'll never forget one day I was in a parking lot in West Texas. And it was kind of windy day, and I saw this really fancy Ford Raptor, which Ford Raptor is kind of like the sports car of trucks. It's a turbocharged Ford F-150 with an 10-cylinder engine, and it was parked diagonally. It was bright red. It was so shiny. It was like shining brighter than the sun. And let me tell you, the sun shines brightly in West Texas. And this gust of wind hit this shopping cart, and I had my hands full of bags. I watched as this shopping cart went across the parking lot and crashed directly into that Ford Raptor. I remember feeling really bad for whoever the person is that owns that car. It's a very expensive car, and I thought, oh, that's gonna leave a mark. But then it also made me think about this. Possessions are overrated. See, possessions, they rot, they rust, they fall apart, and oftentimes you find the nicest things in people's front lawns being sold at a yard sale. They lose their value, they diminish. And God also thinks possessions are overrated. See, as people, we oftentimes view other people through the lens of their possessions and their success. So, influential people often are wealthy and they often are very successful. And a lot of times those two things go hand in hand. If you are really good at something, you generally can earn a lot of money doing it. If you're the best basketball player, you earn a big salary. If you're the best surgeon, you may earn a big salary. And those things matter to us as people. We often elevate those successful, wealthy people to positions of authority and to positions of influence and prominence. But in God's eyes, it doesn't really matter. See, God is not as interested in people's possessions as He is just as them as people. He just sees them as people. In fact, it's more accurate to say that God is more interested in people's lack of possessions than He is in their possessions. I want to read a couple scriptures to you. The first is Psalms 113, 5-8. Listen to this. Who is like the Lord our God, the one who sits enthroned on high, who stoops down to look on the heavens and the earth? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with the princes of His people. James 2:5 says this, Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom He promised to those who love Him? Psalm 9:9 says this, The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And then Proverbs 14:31 says this, Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. There's a couple quick things I want to point out to you about these verses. First is this, God has a soft spot for the poor. Just thinking about that first Psalms verse, it says that God literally looks down at the earth and tries to find the poor so that He can lift them from the ashes and set them next to princes. A great example of this is Manny Pacquiao. So Manny Pacquiao was a Filipino boxer, and growing up he was so poor, he often wore raggedy rags, and he couldn't even afford rice, a staple in the Philippines. Legend is that he would survive off of eating bananas from a banana tree that he had, and that he would fish for his food. Often hungry, often lacking possessions, he found out that he was very talented at boxing. And he actually ended up becoming one of the greatest boxers of all times. He fought against people like Floyd Mayweather, which that was a close match. But he also was like a multiple time world champion in his weight class. And he ended up going from complete rags to riches. At one point in time, he was considered one of the top 10 paid athletes in the world. His net worth was over $250 million. But if you were to ask Manny Pacquiao to this day what got him to where he was, he would tell you hard work, but also his faith in God. See, God positioned people in his life to help him come out of poverty and gain access to possession. But one of the greatest things about Manny Pacquiao is he never forgot where he came from. He knew that God had a heart for people who were poor, and he himself also has a heart for people who are poor. He serves his country in the Philippines as a senator. He oftentimes sets up relief situations, packages for people to help them with their poverty. He's built thousands of houses in the Philippines, and he's given away thousands of pesos to people that line up for miles to meet him. And he's a very generous, and he believes that God uses him to help people escape poverty. He has a soft spot for the poor as well. And here's where I'm going with this. I believe God wants us to have a soft spot for the poor. He wants us to be the hands and feet to help people overcome poverty. He wants us to be the hands and feet to help people find a sense of value and dignity. A lot of times, people who are in situations where they're lacking or they're in poverty, they feel like they aren't as valued. People pass them by, look the other way, don't even pay attention to their needs, and they feel like, man, no one cares about me. Part of having a heart for them is simply saying, I want to be God's hands and feet to you. I may not be able to meet all of your financial needs, but I will be your friend, and I will just acknowledge you. I'll say hi to you. I'll ask how your day is because I care enough about you. And see, that's what we've got to figure out, is how can we help those who are poor. God has given us the opportunity to be one of those people that lifts people from the ashes and puts them next to princes. And for Manny Pacquiao, that might have been building thousands of houses and things like that. But for us, it might be something like buying someone a lunch, or giving them some clothes that we have in our closets, or sparing some change for them so that they can have some spending money. And something as simple as simply acknowledging they exist and not ignoring them, not passing them by when they're on the street corner and they're asking, hey, I need some help. Maybe you don't have the resources available to help them, but you can always ask them how they're doing and check on them. And we really have to, check our hearts, because the last thing that I want us to think about is that our mistreatment of the poor is a mistreatment of God. Right? That last passage, the Proverbs 14:31, I'll read it one more time. Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. And there's two ways we can mistreat the poor. We can mistreat them with our actions, the way we treat them, but we also can mistreat them with our attitudes, the way we think about them. And I believe this, and as we go through this series, I think you're going to see that God has a special heart for poor people. And the way that we think about them and the way that we interact with them is very important to God. He cares very deeply about it. So my challenge to you is just for a moment, pray and ask God for you to see poor people the way that He sees them. He loves them. He cares about them.